Welcome to Forging Plowshares, a community dedicated to cultivating the peaceful kingdom of God. We hope this part of our ongoing conversation stimulates your mind and challenges your heart about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Please stay tuned at the end of the podcast for a short message about our ministry.
This is Paul Axton, Director of Forging Plowshares and Plowshares Bible Institute. And this is the opening of our course on René Girard with the expert on Girard, Michael Hardin. Michael Hardin was an acquaintance of Girard and was at the beginnings of the Girard religion and violence group that became central to making his work known and in fact is still going. He has written extensively on Girard and was kind of a key figure, I think, in introducing Girard then to the large public that have come to know him since. This opening lecture then, he takes up and just tells us the story of René Girard and then introduces us to the literature. And I thought it was important to do this and make it public because I think in this we get an insight into the key books, the key literature, the key thinkers. And this, of course, has become explosive even in recent years, that the numbers of people doing Girard and having an appreciation of Girard is just exponential year by year. But I hope you benefit then from this opening lecture, and we'll do a series then with Michael on René Girard. Forging Plowshares is a nonprofit ministry, and we greatly appreciate your donations. These allow us to continue doing what we're doing. Right now, we're in the midst of the class with Ethan Vanderleek. He is introducing us to William Desmond, and the next class that is coming up is going to be with William Desmond. If you are appreciative of this work, if you've benefited from the podcast, maybe even taken some classes, we certainly appreciate the donations that we receive. We have a few faithful donors that have made this ministry possible. Donations can be made through Outreach International, and their website is oionline.org, and then our project number with Outreach is FP3901. On their page, you can either select PayPal or Simple Give to make a donation. Just use our project number when donating. But we certainly appreciate your donations and thank you for that. But hope you benefit and enjoy this conversation with Michael Hardin on the person and work of René Girard. Michael, would you like to know who it is you're talking to here?
Sure.
You already know Tim.
Well, I'm in his discipleship class on Facebook. And
Tim is the one that originally introduced us. I don't know if you remember, years ago.
Oh, God. I can't. It's 67. Yes. I can't remember yesterday.
Yeah, exactly.
I have people come up to me and they'll say, I met you here and here. And I had a lady call me the other day. We talked at such and such a meeting. And I'm thinking, maybe we did. I don't know. I just can't remember. When you're out there on the road for a decade and you're meeting thousands of people over and over, it's except for the people you stay with at their homes, it's hard to remember.
Yeah.
I'm Jim. I've always had a question mark hanging over what I've heard all my life about salvation and penalty and guilt, but I never knew how to even talk about it or ask questions about it. Stumbled upon Paul's blog and his classes, and so I've been hanging on, trying to catch up with you guys are talking about. So this is probably my fourth or fifth class.
Yeah, you've been here several years, I think, haven't you, Jim?
2.5 or so.
I'm Nate Heil. I discovered Paul through my friend Jordan Daniel Wood, and because Jordan taught a class on Maximus, and I'm like, I wanted to get the opportunity to take that class, and I liked what Paul was doing, and this is, I think, my third class now of Paul's.
My name is Alan Contreras. I'm from Mexico, and I met Mr. Axton back in college. He was one of my professors there, so I've been with him for quite some time, I think. I went through all of the Forging Plowshares classes already, so I think I'm your first graduate from Plowshares, I think.
That's right.
Uh,
That's right.
yeah. So through him, we've read some of Girard's material. I actually wrote a book on sacrifices, and I referenced Girard on it several times. I think I dedicated a whole chapter or two on him. So,
Oh, nice. Okay.
yeah, I'm excited to learn more about him.
Very good.
Alan is doing Forging Plowshares Mexico.
Mhm.
So he has his own classes, he publishes his own stuff, and he's taken the ball and run with it.
Trying to.
So I'm Brad Klingel. This is my second class with Paul. I discovered Forging Plowshares because I like love Jordan Daniel Wood's stuff, and then I saw him on Forging Plowshares, and I just think that what Paul is doing is great. It's totally my style of sort of hyper localism, and if you can call the internet hyper localism, but of just reducing. I'm a big fan of Ivan Illich and just trying to reduce everything down to as much face-to-face encounters as possible. And I discovered Girard. A friend of mine introduced me to him, and I was like, I don't get it. Like, what's the deal with this guy? And then I started engaging with him earlier this year, and he revolutionized the way that I've spent a long time. I have a big background in theology, but he revolutionized the way that I thought about a lot of things, especially the ontology of God as utterly incapable of any form of violence, and I don't like the term pacifist because it sounds unengaging and problematic. But like, I don't think I could ever condone the use of violence after the way in which Girard helped me to understand Christ and God. And I'd had problems with, I liked the analogical view of the Old Testament anyway, and had, basically decided God didn't do half the stuff that he's represented as having doing. But I think Girard gave me a key for understanding things, and for I basically everybody I can grab hold of, I'm like, you got to read Girard. And I started groups with Girard. I tried very hard to get friends of mine to join this class. I just pushed Girard like a drug pusher. He's just I think he's extraordinarily vital for understanding. I think he's the best psychologist. I think he's one of the best theologians. He's the best interpreter of scripture. He's among the greats. And I think I'm not a huge fan of Robert Barron, but Robert Barron's like, look, this guy's going to be regarded as a church father. Mm-hmm. And I think he's right. I'm Catholic. So yeah, I can't speak any more highly of what Girard has done for me, or what I think he can do for people, than that.
Annette, you are unique in this group, and I hope you feel fully embraced. We need all of the feminine presence we can get at Forging Plowshares, so we're so happy.
Well, now, and that's the one person I know well.
I met Michael, I don't know, was it 2011 maybe?
Yeah, probably something like that.
Yeah, it's been a while. I loved all his posts in this one group that we were in on Facebook. And then he had his book coming out, The Jesus Driven Life. So, and I just really felt like I had to read this book. So I got it and read it I read it pretty fast. I was just all in.
That's fantastic. Super, Annette.
Good deal. Good deal. So glad to have you, Annette. Andrew, I feel like I'm forever indebted to, because at the end of our Jordan Wood class, I left him out of the class. I've borne that guilt for some time.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you scapegoating me out of the Jordan Wood class. So no, I'm just teasing. In terms of Girard, I have some familiarity with René Girard. I'm by no means an expert, and have not read as much as many of the other people here. So I'm very much looking forward to learn what I can. Thank you for letting me do this again, Paul.
Oh, so glad you came back. And Carl, you're new to me.
I discovered this group because learned about a book called by Douglas Campbell and John Depew called Beyond Justification, Liberating Paul's Gospel, I think it is. Yes. And I wanted to read that book, but first I looked for reviews and the internet. I found a review from this group.
We had John Depew actually come in and lecture a couple of weeks, and then John shared that book with the Romans class, and so we all read it in its galley proofs. So, and I did I've done 2 or 3 interviews with Campbell and did some with Depew too. So,
yeah, I've never met John, but Doug is a friend of mine.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Brian.
I am in Charlotte, North Carolina. I grew up in Mississippi, but when 2020 hit, I was starting to think about our divide in our culture. I remember in the back of my mind, this guy, René Girard, and the question of how and why we make enemies. And so I started looking into his work again, and I listened to David Cayley's productions on him, which are great on the CBC. Mm-hmm. And then I was Googling more. I wanted to hear more about René Girard. That's how I came across Forging Plowshares, because they were talking about him a good bit, a few years back. And so this is my 10th class with Forging Plowshares, and really happy that we're talking about Girard's theories directly, and glad to have you, Michael. Thank you so much, and glad to be here with all of you.
And Brian is presently in the midst of a blog series on Romans that's been very good. And I know the next installment's on the way.
Awesome.
Yes. Yeah, most of it's written. The editing is the hard part.
Yeah, we've appreciated you doing that.
Yeah.
I think it was through John Milbank that I found Forging Plowshares, and then did the Jordan Daniel Wood class, and then the Imaginative Apologetics class. And then I'm getting a philosophy degree online now through a Catholic college in Connecticut to hopefully teach eventually. Looking forward to this class.
But Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I hope everybody is a little bit appreciative that Michael he's kind of a internet presence, but I've done a couple of, maybe 3 interviews with him. He just struck me as someone that has insight. He knew Girard, and he's done such creative work, done a lot of writing. And so that was the basis of the class.
I grew up Catholic in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 60s and 70s. I had an excellent experience in the Catholic tradition. I had an attorney at one point refer to me as a roaming Catholic. I've never been happy as a Protestant. I'm a critic of both sides of the Protestant tradition, the conservative and the liberal. I'm not a fan of the institution of Rome, but that's just me. It's a little too Protestant there, I think. I don't know. I spent my formative years at a Bible college where I learned right off the bat the beauty of the historical critical method when it's used properly. I learned my Karl Barth and Bonhoeffer there when I was just 19 and 20 years old, and began reading voraciously in Barth and Bonhoeffer at that age, and have continued since. When I went to seminary from 82 to 88, the professor there, Burton Nelson, happened to be the director of the oral history project for Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And so I got to meet over a dozen of Bonhoeffer's students and several of his family members, and spend a significant amount of time with some of them. I went to seminary at North Park Theological Seminary in Chicago. I graduated in 88, became a pastor, burnt out in the ministry after 7 years, and then I have just been on my own journey ever since. And it's a journey that has had its dark nights of the soul. It's had its challenges. But in 2007, my first wife, who's now deceased, we started a project called Preaching Peace that is no longer a presence on the internet. I've taken that down. And I started publishing my first books, and they all were in and around the use of mimetic theory. So what I'd like to do here just tonight is to give you a little history of René, and then my encounter with René, and then the larger picture of where mimetic theory research has gone. In 1987, I was in my last year of seminary, and I went to the bookstore, and I was reading a book a day at that point, and there was a book. And on the inside of the front cover, it said the author reversed 3 millennia of biblical interpretation using this guy, Girard. I just thought, this is stupid. Nobody reverses 3 millennia of biblical interpretation. So I put the book on the shelf. I wandered around and couldn't find another book that grabbed my attention. So I went back and I spent my 1995 on that Harper and Row book, Must There Be Scapegoats by Father Raymond Schwager. I didn't read that book in one day. It took me 3 days to read that book. It took my head off, emptied it out, and put it back in. It was a magical experience, being introduced to a mimetic way of thinking. I immediately went to a colleague, a professor there, and I said to Ed, I said, we need to study this. And so we did. We literally went out. This is now November of 1987. We bought everything that you could buy at that time. Girard only had 5 books. There was 1 or 2 Festschrifts, and there were, I don't know, 40, 50 journal articles. Literally, I could read everything Girardian that had ever been published in 1987. And I did. And I have watched since then the explosion of literature and articles and podcasts and videos that have been done in and around René. It was amazing. In 1990, I made a phone call to René at Stanford. I was a pastor in New York at that time, and he was gracious, took my phone call and invited me to come out and join a little meeting of some of his friends. And so I did. And there were, I don't know, maybe 30 people there, 25, 30 people there. And this meeting were a group of scholars that had been part of the West Star Institute under Bob Funk. And Bob Funk, out of the West Star Institute came 2 organizations. The first I'm pretty sure you're familiar with, and that's the Jesus Seminar. But these other scholars were looking to do something other than what Bob's agenda was. And Bob's agenda was to debunk the Gospels. That he had a very clear agenda. And these other scholars felt that wasn't to their liking. So they gathered around René. And in 1990, they decided to form a little group called the Colloquium on Violence and Religion. And then they became that year an affiliate member, and they had their first meeting at the AAR. And that was the first time I gave a paper on Girard, on mimetic theory, I should say, and have continued to do so over the decades. René, he was a character. I don't know how, you see, I got to know him as an old man. I was just thinking about this the other day. I'm 67. I got to know René when he was just 65. So I didn't know much about his life or what he was like as a human being before that. I found out, Martha told me, Martha's his wife, and she likes to tell tales on René. And for those of you that understand the lingo, evidently René was quite the mimetic character in the 50s and 60s and 70s, but he mellowed in his older years. I think partly because he finally got the recognition I think he felt he deserved. with the establishment of the colloquium on violence and religion. René was born in 1923 in Avignon, France. His father was the curator of the papal archive there, and it was pretty clear as René, became an older teenager, young adult, that he was going to follow in his father's footsteps. So he initially began training as an archivist, and he went to Paris at the very beginning of World War I. Then the Nazis came and occupied Paris while he was there studying at the Sorbonne. And that was very traumatic for him. René's not the kind of person that you can just tie down. He's a free thinker, but he's very free-spirited as well. After the war, he made his way to the United States and immediately set about getting a job as a French language teacher at an all-girls school. And he noticed that they were learning French by reading these trashy French novels, and he was not going to have any of that. René was a bit of an elitist when it came to French. He would eventually become a member of the Académie Française, which is supposed to be the protector of the French language. But he did not like this garbage trash these girls were having to read, and so he began having them read Proust. And as he was reading Proust, and teaching these young girls French, it was then he discovered what we now know as the French triangle of the wife, the husband, and the lover. He began just exploring just that concept. He would read, during these years, he would read as well Stendhal, Dostoevsky, and his favorite author, Cervantes. He always felt that Cervantes and Don Quixote had grasped the real problem of what he would call mediated desire. That book, the actual physical book that he read as a young teenager, was the only book that remained by his bedside, and it was there the night he died in the fall of 2015. René would go on to get a PhD here in the States, and he said it was so silly because he didn't want to do the hard work. You have to understand, René's lazy. He was lazy. He didn't want to do the hard work. So he wrote to the French consulate and he said, I'm going to do an essay on American views of France during World War II. The consulate sent him 2 boxes of magazine articles and newspaper clippings. He just put those together and wrote a PhD, and they gave it to him. He would go on to meet his future wife, Martha, teaching at this school. They would get married. They have a number of children and grandchildren, all of whom are truly wonderful. René would end up at a school in Philadelphia, Bryn Mawr. It was there that he produced his first major work, which is Deceit, Desire, and the Novel, which is an analysis of the problem of mediated desire in these 5 authors that I just previously mentioned. Then he got a job at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And because the kids were young, they didn't want to leave Philadelphia. So René would take the train every day, and he'd drive from Philly to Baltimore. On the train, it's only about an hour and 15 minutes. It's not that far. But it was on this train that he began seeing some of the serious implications of the mimetic theory. It was also at this time that he went to the doctor, and this was in the early 60s, and they diagnosed him with skin cancer on his forehead. Well, cancer was a very, very bad word in the early 60s. It was essentially a death sentence, and René took it as that. And he went, and he and Martha had a long talk. They went and got properly married in the church. And he had a Holy Week conversion experience, essentially. After that, the train rides took on a totally different character. And he is now meditating on the gospel. meditating on this notion of mediated desire that he's seeing in these authors, and he begins to see a bigger picture. And so he will begin engaging with French psychoanalysts and philosophers, and in 1972 will produce the book that basically earned him his reputation, which was Violence in the Sacred. Violence in the Sacred was really a tough book for reviewers. They didn't know what to do with it. And so the reviewer from the French journal Le Monde called René and said, what do we do with this book? We don't know how to review it. And René says, just tell everybody it's the first atheistic theory of religion. So that's what the reviewer wrote. This book is the first atheistic view of religion. Of course, everybody thinks that's the reviewer writing it, but he got it from René. And actually, that's what René did produce. He managed to produce a truly amazing piece of work, because for the first time, the philosophy of religion could talk about origins outside of essentialism, that notion that we all have some kind of God-shaped hole in us that has to be filled. After 1972 and the publication of Violence in the Sacred, René would continue now with a fever to engage Holy Scripture. He'd been doing it in the 60s and had produced a fair amount of material that was not published, but he wrote voraciously on this old typewriter until computers came along, and then later he would use even in the early 2000s when he was writing, he was still using DOS-based stuff. He had this old setup in his office. I mean, he was old school. But he would produce over the next 6 years his magisterial magnum opus, the book Things Hidden from the Foundation of the World, which, if you have not read, is the absolute mind-blowing book. It was this book, when I read it in 1987, that got me started on not just seeking to understand mimetic theory, but also to engage it. And I wrote a paper at that time in my senior year of seminary on the Epistle to the Hebrews through the lens of mimetic theory, and I basically out-Girarded Girard. He could not see much value in the Epistle to the Hebrews with a mimetic reading. I thought there was an awful lot of value there, and so I that's the paper I wrote. It's been published in several places, and you're welcome to read it. I don't know if I've put it in the section in the classroom or not. But after 1978, he would publish the fourth and final component of the mimetic theory, and that's his book, The Scapegoat, in 1982. These first 4 books are the books that comprise the mimetic theory. Everything else is commentary. Everything else he's written is commentary on those 4 books. And so those 4 books are the mimetic theory. If you're going to discuss mimetic theory proper, you have to have those 4 books. You can't just use later books and other stuff. You have to have those 4 books. What's amazing to me is when it comes to the critics of Girard and mimetic theory, I can always tell which books they haven't read. Because if they, or I should say, which one book they have read, and they're trying to criticize the theory based upon that. And it's impossible to do because it is a totalizing theory. It does encompass just about everything you can imagine. And totalizing theories in a postmodern world don't mix, as you know. And this is one of the critiques the feminists have of mimetic theory, is that it is totalizing. And it can feel that way. I have to even admit myself, it can feel that way as a hardcore Bartian and having to engage mimetic theory. I've often understood that smother mother complex mimetic theory can have, and but it's not there. It's really not. It's in our heads. So after 1982, René would be honored with several Festschriften, and he would be in 1980 he would move to Stanford, till his retirement in 1994. He continued to produce a number of very important books. A collection of his essays came out entitled "To Double Business Bound" on Camus and Dostoevsky and other French writers. It's a hard to find book, but you can. He wrote his little book on Dostoevsky at this time, on the Notes from the Underground. That you can find in a reprint. He has a book on Job that he wrote, which I think I don't ever see it referenced, hardly at all anywhere. And I think it's one of the more profound books that he wrote, called Job, the Victim of His People. So if you haven't read that, I really do encourage people to give that one a look. He would go on to write his book on Shakespeare, which was a mind-blowing book, just absolutely stunning in its expansive interpretation of Shakespeare and showing the coherence from beginning to end in Shakespeare, and how Shakespeare really is the true mimetic theorist. I mean, René says he does mimetic theory better than me. I mean, that's what René said about himself. I Saw Satan came out in the late 90s. I think that's probably one of his most important books, and it's overlooked, and the implications of that book are huge. And then there would be a number of interview books that are published in between time. René does his best. The books that are best by René are the ones where he's interviewed. And so I just picked up two out of my library. One is called When These Things Begin, and another one is called The One by Whom Scandal Comes. I've added to that collection. When it comes time, I'll talk about my addition to that interview collection. But René does his best work in interviews, and I've always thought that he was much better in conversations than he was when he's in his writing. His writing is very thick, it's very dense. Fortunately, for the most part, the translations, in English at least, have been well done. They've been done by folks that know René. The one book that is absolutely awful in its translation is Violence in the Sacred. It really, I'm not a French expert. I had to learn French, from my PhD, and so I could read Girard. But I have to say the translator of Violence in the Sacred really quite butchered things. And there's been talk of retranslating it, but it's not, they're not there yet. It will one day get retranslated, and then that'll be very cool. But I mean, it's okay. You can read it, make sense of it, but the translation is far more challenging than it needs to be. So in the late 2000s, René was writing a book on the Apostle Paul, which we will never see. The manuscript, or the part of the manuscript for that, is now in an archive in Paris with all his other stuff. But I'm not sure if it was a result of, or because, if there's correlation or causation here with the great financial crisis, but René began thinking through the category of apocalypse, and he began reading the Prussian military strategist von Clausewitz, and he would write his book, Battling to the End. And that was his last official publication. It's a tough book to read. I could tell you from conversations with René even in 2013, prior to the dementia setting in, wasn't so much dementia as it was like senility. The last two times I saw him, he wasn't quite present, if you know what I mean. It was mostly a visit with Martha. But with Battling to the End, he had quite the soured look on the future. And I think he could imagine the kind of stuff we're going through today. And he didn't know what kind of world we were leaving our grandchildren. And that was very important to him. However, at the end of his life, for whatever reasons, he was quite content and always happy. That was just René. And yeah, so that's Girard. But what I'd like to do is just simply to turn you on to some of the expansive stuff that's been done in the mimetic theory world. People will have access to this recording. So I'm just going to go through some books. First of all, the definitive biography of René has been, that's more of a critical biography. It has been published by his friend, Benoit Chantre, in French, and it's currently being translated into English. So I really can't wait for that to come out, because my French, it would take me forever to read that book. But in the meantime, there is the book Evolution of Desire by Cynthia Haven. And Cynthia was a student of René's at Stanford University, and knew him and Martha and well. And in fact, most of the folks whose books I'm going to show you tonight, many of them would be friends from the colloquium on violence and religion. Overall, I'll be recommending several books on mimetic theory. The first one, the best one, I think the best one out there is Wolfgang Polliver's book on René Girard's mimetic theory by Wolfgang Polliver. I think it's an excellent book. I think it's my kind of go-to book. Wolfgang is a funny guy. I've known Wolfgang going back into the early 90s, and he was the dean there of the Catholic Theological School where Schwager taught. I don't know if you know Father Schwager. I'll be bringing up his name in a minute, but he plays a key role. He was Wolfgang's teacher. The Kiwi, Chris Fleming, has a book on René Girard. He's from New Zealand. Chris is an awesome dude, part of the Australian Girard seminar. This book on Girard is also fantastic as an introduction. And then third is Richard Golson's book on René, which I have always found really another wonderful introduction. And there's a lot of introductions to Girard out there, but those are some of my favorites. Father Raymond Schwager. Without Father Schwager, there wouldn't be a colloquium on violence and religion. There would not be all the work that has been done that we've done since then. I really don't think. Schwager was the first biblical interpreter, the first one to use mimetic theory in biblical interpretation. In his book, Must There Be Scapegoats? But what's really curious is that in the few years in the run-up from 1975 to 1978, when Must There Be Scapegoats was first published in German, and 1978 was also the year that Things Hidden from the Foundation of the World was first published in French. Both these books would get published the same year in their respective languages. Both would get translated into English in 1987. So when I was reading these in the fall of 87, they were just fresh off the press in terms of translation. Father Schwager had a correspondence with René during this time, and they both had Violence in the Sacred and Deceit, Desire in the Novel. And they would both end up producing a reading of the Bible based upon those two works of Girard. Girard would do Things Hidden. Schwager would do Must There Be Scapegoats. Father Schwager's book, Must There Be Scapegoats, is superior to René's rendering of Holy Scripture in Things Hidden from the Foundation of the World. But what makes Things Hidden so powerful is Girard's unveiling this God that is so non-violent, so non-retributive. And for me, what that did was, of course, it's going to open up a question we'll deal with next week and the week after, and that's the old Marcionite question. How do you relate this loving God of Jesus to this supposedly violent God in the Jewish scriptures? And Things Hidden was the book that really topped that for me and for an awful lot of people. So if you're curious, you can all go out and you can get those letters. They've been collected, translated, and edited here in this volume, the correspondence from 74 through 1991. Now, in that small group I told you about that gathered together in the in 1990, there were a number of scholars whose names you may or may not be familiar with. Bruce Chilton would have been there from Bard College. Bruce is an Aramaist, has written some fantastic stuff on the historical Jesus, as well as some other New Testament writings. Gil Bailey. Gil is an attorney from Tennessee. And this was the second book after Must There Be Scapegoats published, but it was the first book published by a member of the brand new Colloquium on Violence and Religion. And I remember when this came out, we were also so thrilled and so proud that somebody was doing something. And Gil, if you've not read this Violence Unveiled, Gil is a conservative Roman Catholic, still is. Beautiful man, just a beautiful man, brilliant thinker, like so many of you, and an independent scholar. And this book, Violence Unveiled, when it came out, it really did open doors for so many of us. One of the early scholars that was there was James Williams, who taught in Oklahoma at one of the universities there. He wrote a book, The Bible, Violence, and the Sacred. He would eventually go on to become the third president of the Colloquium on Violence and Religion, and would eventually write the little history, the Girardians, the first 20 years. And it's all about us and all the stuff that we did and this and that and the other. And what is that? That same group, after the third year, decided to produce its own journal. So there are now, I think, 30-something volumes of the journal Contagion. So if you're looking for the cutting edge stuff that the Girardians are writing, it's Contagion. You can access this now only in electronic form by becoming a member of the Colloquium on Violence and Religion. But anybody that's doing cutting edge work is going to be publishing in Contagion. Now, I mentioned Father Schwager, who very, very sadly passed away way too early. He had they went in to do a thyroidectomy on him, and he died during the operation. They found out later he didn't even need it. But he wrote a number of other books related to the use of the mimetic theory. Perhaps his most important is an appropriation of mimetic theory for systematic theology. This has had an enormous impact on me. If you've read this book, you'll see the impact of it all over my work. Jesus in the Drama of Salvation by Father Raymond Schwager. To me, Must There Be Scapegoats and Jesus in the Drama of Salvation should be required reading for every seminarian. I think it's excellent stuff. Early on in the colloquium, we had this fella that was full of vim and vigor and just brilliant. Trained at Oxford. His father had been a British MP. And had the best sense of humor ever, absolutely ever. And he was a Roman Catholic priest. Some of you know Father James Allison. And this is James's book. I have many, many of James' books, his works. But this is his book, The Joy of Being Wrong. It's his PhD dissertation. James is fantastic in using mimetic theory. And even if he's got a website you can go to, he has so many homilies and sermons and just wonderful resources. James is a dear, dear friend. I have a story I could tell. I don't know if I dare tell it. I don't know where everybody's political correctness sense of humor is, but it's a James story, and it's anyway. James was the one that helped correct Girard and his understanding of homosexuality in Things Hidden from the Foundation of the World. It truly was James single-handedly that helped show René that the thinking that was found there wasn't the best. But what's also important to know is that a good portion of that third section in Things Hidden that deals with psychology was not produced by René. It was produced by one of his interlocutors, Jean-Michel Agoulien, who is also an excellent thinker in his own right. Bombastic would be the word I would use to describe Bob Hamilton Kelly. Bob was larger than life. Bob walked into a room and everybody knew it. Bob was from South Africa. Bob read every possible book that was available on the planet. His job at the Center for Strategic Initiative there at Stanford paid him to read, and he reveled in it, and he read everything. He was also one of, if not one of René's closest friend. The two of them met together frequently. They had a little meeting every Friday at Stanford that students would drop in and out of. And Bob, once if they recorded any of those, he said no. He'd taken notes, but sadly Bob has passed, and I have no idea where those notes are, but those would be fun to look at. But Bob has several books, I think, that really broke ground. His first book didn't break ground, too. It broke his heart. Sacred Violence is on Paul's hermeneutic of the cross. This is one of the finest books that I've ever read on Paul until I read Doug Campbell's work, The Deliverance of God, and then later his Pauline Dogmatics. But Bob Hamilton Kelly took a beating for this book at an AAR meeting back in 1993. I mean, he took a beating for it. He would write a little commentary on the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel and the Sacred. And so all this is getting produced, in the 90s, and it's just the ability of mimetic theory to open things up, Christian, just was astonishing to all of us that were there. I just have some other books I'm just going to just run through real quick for those that may or may not be familiar or who are interested in the topics. There is Father Andrew Mars. He's an Episcopal monk in Three Rivers, Michigan. He's the abbot there of the Three Rivers Monastery. Tools for Peace. This is on the spirituality of St. Benedict and through a mimetic lens. Stephen Finnemore, who is a Baptist in England, has written a dissertation called God, Order, and Chaos. This is on the book of the Revelation, reading the book of Revelation from a mimetic theory perspective. Jean-Michel Agoulien, one of the two interlocutors, in addition to Guy Lefort in Things Hidden. Jean-Michel has a number of books he's written, The Puppet of Desire, but there's also The Genesis of Desire. And here he goes into the Bible and he gives his own mimetic reading of the Genesis myth. Again, I have a lot of things I sit and argue with all my mimetic theory friends, as I'm sure they do with me, but these are all enlightening and enriching books. I didn't bring anything up by Tony Bartlett, but Anthony Bartlett is an independent former Roman Catholic priest who's written some very, very good work from engaging Christianity and the mimetic theory. But the book that perhaps did more for mimetic theory and atonement than any other book was Mark Heim's Saved from Sacrifice. And some of you may be familiar with this. It's an Erdman's publication, and it is phenomenal. I've made my own little contributions to this. This is my book, The Jesus-Driven Life, which is a mimetic reading of the Bible. I've just finished up. My latest book is called Liberating the Gospel from Christian Myth, and it essentially lays out a frame for understanding the authority of Holy Scripture without needing a theory of inspiration and using the mimetic concepts to distinguish between religion and revelation, and thus answering the old Marcionite problem and being able to move beyond it. I also mentioned I contributed to the Girardian corpus. This is Reading the Bible with René Girard. Steve Barry, who is now a House representative in the state of New Hampshire for the State House there, At the time, he was a pastor of a congregational church in Manchester, Vermont. Steve went out and filmed 11 hours with René. And then I took those 11 hours of transcripts and spent forever and a day editing this thing. Whitfenstock commissioned me to write a little introduction called Mimetic Theory and Biblical Interpretation, which I did for their Cascade book series. But one of my favorite Girardian biblical interpreters is not a Christian. You probably haven't heard of him, and that's Sander Goodhart. Sandy's wonderful. He is brilliantly himself. He's a schmoozer. He could charm your socks right off your feet. That's Sandy. But his book, Sacrificing Commentary, really helped me, because when I read the Jewish scriptures, one of the things I've been trying to do since the 1980s is to read them through Jewish eyes. So I've studied the rabbis and the Talmud and the Mishnah and Tosefta and the Targums and Second Temple literature. I've been wanting to do that. That's been something important to me. So to have Sandy come along and do these kinds of readings really was such a wonderful confirmation and comfort. And I remember at one meeting in Riverside, California, I don't know what year it was, perhaps 2007 or 8, Sandy and I were together. And we were discussing Jesus. And he made the interesting statement. He said, Michael, your Jesus, your understanding of Jesus and mine just aren't that far apart. And I thought that was important. I would have loved to have done more work with Sandy on that, but we just never got the opportunity. But the mimetic theory has been applied now way outside of Scripture. In fact, it was not Scripture that it first begins to be used. It's in literature, literary theory, literary criticism. And so the first Festschrifts on Girard that are published in the 1980s, the Festschrifts published then are dealing with economics, philosophy, political theory, but a lot of literary readings early on. And then after the Colloquium on Violence and Religion is formed, after it leaves Westar, it's the Bible stuff that happens first, and then the Colloquium on Violence and Religion takes a turn because mimetic theory is now being used in all kinds of sciences. And so now these other disciplines are coming to the meetings. And it's not just Bible people, it's all kinds of people. It's hundreds of people. We started with 30, and I remember being in some meetings with as many as 300, and they only meet once a year. One of the most important books to come out was a book edited by Scott Garrels called Mimesis in Science. And it's so important for me that the mimetic theory does not have simply I don't know what words I'm looking for. It's not just made up. It's not just a frame, that has no grounding. There's at every single turn, every insight that René had in the mimetic theory, to my knowledge, has been validated by science, and particularly neuroscience. And we'll be talking about some of that. But Scott Garrels' book, Mimesis in Science, gave a lot of us that were just doing the theological stuff courage, that we weren't just, it wasn't just another hermeneutic, that we discovered, that we were working with something real when it came to anthropology. In the late 2000s, there were several years where the mimetic theorists began engaging with Islam and the religions native to India and the Vedic traditions. And so Wolfgang Polliver and Richard Schenck will eventually publish their Mimetic Theory in World Religions book, which again shows the value of using the mimetic theory in religious traditions. Girard tried to do that in his little book on sacrifice, where he engages a particular book about the Vedic traditions. I think that other scholars out there are again out Girarding Girard. which I don't think he would care about anymore. There might have been a time, but at the end of his life, he was just very pleased to see people develop things that he hadn't thought of. I know for myself personally, and I can say this because he said it publicly many times about my work, is that I saw and brought forth the positive imitation of Jesus side of things that nobody else had done. So that was my contribution to this piece, according to René. For those of you that love philosophy, you're going to love Giuseppe Fornari's big, fat 2-volume set, Dionysius, Christ, and the Death of God. It is 2 volumes, and the second volume opens up with an analysis of the wedding at Cana from this perspective, and it's just brilliant, brilliant work. So Giuseppe Fornari's 2-volume set. All of these, by the way, are published by the University of Michigan State Press. And I failed to mention earlier that the Colloquium on Violence and Religion was initially partially financed by funding from one of René and Bob Hamilton Kelly's students, Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel would form an organization called the Shire. One of the organizations under the Shire was Imitatio. And Imitatio was given a budget, and part of that budget helped support my little organization, Preaching Peace, for a decade, supported Gil Bailey's work, Cornerstone, for a decade. Then they got out of the church side of supporting things, the religious side of supporting things, but they supported a book series. And all Colloquium members got these books free. And Peter's generosity allowed the heroic efforts, the editor of this series of books, there's now 70, 80 of them, 90 perhaps, that have been published, all from all different types of disciplines. There's The Sacrifice of Socrates, Athens, Plato, and Girard by Blake Terrell. Again, a fascinating reading of the death of Socrates through the mimetic theory. My own dissertation advisor is Scott Cowdell in Australia. He writes on Girard and modernity. So for those of you that are looking for literature related to that, there you go. A friend of mine teaches at Scranton, Dwayne Armitage. He's writing the foreword for my latest book. This is on Heidegger and Nietzsche through mimetic theory. And it's called Philosophies, Violent, Sacred. And his argument is that philosophy has its scapegoats. There's an independent scholar in Costa Rica, San Jose, Costa Rica, Dave Dawson. For those that are really, really interested in exploring this phenomenon just of the scapegoat as an idea, where it comes from, it's a linguistic background, everything, this is flesh becomes word. It's a lexicography of the scapegoat and the scapegoat mechanism. It's Dawson who points out in this work that it was Calvin that first brought the 2 goats together into a theory of the atonement. And then that's, of course, somebody in here I know mentioned getting stuck in penal substitution theory. Well, there's the roots of it. For me, the most interesting thing, the most interesting disciplines that I like to engage with these days outside of the biblical studies and theological stuff has to do with the paleoanthropology. There's a number of books. There's How We Became Human, Mimetic Theory and the Science of Evolutionary Origins. You know that Girard has been called the Darwin of the Human Sciences by Michel Serres, who's a member of the Académie Française. And you heard Paul mention earlier that Girard will be mentioned as a church father down the road. I would be very, very surprised. But I think Girard's contribution, it's for all of its getting known out there now. And in particular, it's getting known because of J.D. Vance. J.D. was a student and friend of Peter, not a student of Peter Thiel's, but a friend of Peter Thiel's. And J.D. understands mimetic theory. And just as Peter uses mimetic theory to game the markets and make his money, J.D. understands mimetic theory enough to game the political environment. And I'm not saying that's good or bad for any case. I know them. I know Peter, and I don't know JD, but I know Peter. But again, Peter has funded so much research out there, and part of that is this business of what's going on. Was René correct when he said that religion is the mother of culture? Was he correct? Well, in the beginning, there was a lot of criticism. Now, with Cato Hoyuk and Göbekli Tepe, and the mimetic theorists that are doing work on those sites. We have mimetic theorists actually working with the archaeologists, interpreting what they're finding. We are finding that René was absolutely correct. So you have this one, how we became human, but you also have the more interesting one, can we survive our origins? And same editors, Antonello and Gifford, but boy, I'll tell you, this one will keep you up at night. It will keep you up at night. And then just, there's all kinds of stuff. Here, I just grabbed this off the shelf. Violence in the Films of Alfred Hitchcock. It's a mimetic theory study. And here's another one. Jean-Pierre Dupuis. Jean-Pierre, brilliant mind, just absolutely brilliant mind, has dozens of books. He's an early Girardian proponent going back into the 70s. But here's one on his economy in the future through the lens of mimetic theory. There's two other books I'll call your attention to. There's a Festschrift for René called For René Girard. It's a whole bunch of these authors that you have just seen their books. And we were asked by the editors how René had changed our thinking. And so there's probably 20, 25 of us in here that have short essays on how Girard helped change our thinking. And then there is the Palgrave Handbook on Mimetic Theory and Religion, which is a substantive volume related to everything mimetic theory up through about 2012, 13, 14, somewhere in there. My essay on mimetic theory, appropriation of mimetic theory in American Protestant Christianity, is in that book. I'm showing you all the books I'm going to show you. The point in all this is, my friends, is that since 1990, what began as an attempt of a group of scholars to engage scripture has now morphed into a worldwide, it is global. Girard's works have been translated in over 20 languages. PhDs are being written on him all over the world. And I think at this point in time, I think it's safe to say we've laid a foundation, but we have not begun to build a house. And that work is for generations like Connor and others that are much, younger and have a life ahead of them to do the work they're going to do.
It's we all have to go out and buy a bunch of books now, Michael.
Well, I'll put as many as I can in the classroom. I have a fair number of them in PDF, but I don't want to be violating copyright laws and all that. So
put the Girard Reader up that you have access to. So
yeah, that was a very good book by Jim Williams, that Girard Reader. There are better readers now, but that was the first of several, and I just happen to have a PDF of it. So, but there are better readers out there now.
Michael, I couldn't help. This is the first thing, the first thought that occurs to me that I want to ask you about is, what do you make of the fact that this interest in Girard seems to cut across political boundaries that are often very, you mentioned Thiel and Vance, and I was first introduced to Girard in 1989 when I was a student at the very progressive Evergreen State College here in Olympia, Washington, where I still live. And so there's this interest in Girard, like at both extreme ends of the political spectrum. What do you think that says about Girard's work, that we find that to be the case?
Well, so here's what's really bizarre. That's a great question. What is it that most people think creates problems? our differences. I'm black, you're white. I'm old, you're young. I'm male, you're female. We think it's our differences. No. Girard's very clear. It's our sameness and our inability to admit that. I think that somehow mimetic theory, people that take it seriously they really do undergo a cruciform experience, because you can't help but see this stuff in your own life, and it kills you. It really does, I think that's part of what happens. There are going to be misuses and misappropriations of mimetic theory. If you know how it works, and you can make crowds, create scapegoats, that's a misuse of it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. In the same way, for example, that Eric Metaxas is out there misusing Dietrich Bonhoeffer in his books. There are those that misuse Bonhoeffer, that misuse Girard. They're few and far between at this point, and I don't think they're taken too seriously at this point, but they do give it a bad name, But I think I think it's because it cuts to our anthropological core,
Yeah.
Are you saying that Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance are then using Girard in a kind of as a kind of mechanism to manipulate?
Well, if let's just take Peter in the markets. Well, okay, so Paul, here's how Peter works. Most of us, when it comes to the markets, we're going to wait until it's really hot and everybody and their brother's investing in Nvidia, and then we'll invest, right? Well, that's usually at the top of the market. When the shoeshine boy is telling you what stocks to buy, to get out, right? But a contrarian investor invests against the mob. So if you wait until stocks are at the bottom, and that's when you buy. Okay, that's the hardest thing for any investor to learn. Okay, but Peter's able to see where the mob is going, and he's a contrarian investor, and that's how he has made his fortune. Now, JD, I don't know well, and I can't speak for him, but I do. I'm wondering, and I'm only wondering out loud, if there's not some misuse of the mimetic theory, for example, in the they're eating our cats type stories, and his willingness to say, well, if I have to make up stories to get your attention, but without recognizing the damage it's doing to a specific community in a certain place. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? I'm trying not to name names or anything, but I think JD is well aware of how the mechanism works and how.
I think we call that evil.
I would just call it manipulative.
Someone purposely.
Yeah, I would. It's definitely manipulative.
Yeah. I think you will probably address this later, and it's one I haven't quite got a grasp on. And that is, what was Girard's final conclusion in regard to Old Testament sacrifice?
Okay, so there's some important things here to consider. One is the earliest publication on this is Things Hidden. He will, 25 years after the publication of Things Hidden, there is a book that will come out called Evolution and Conversion. And that book revisits Things Hidden after 25 years. And one of the things that René confesses in that book is his misunderstanding of sacrifice. And I think it's legitimate, not only his confession of that, but others' critiques of his earlier work on particularly stuff out of the book of Leviticus. I think he owns up to, in a sense, scapegoating the word sacrifice. And it was Father Schwager that pointed this out to him. So I would have to say he goes through a thought process on this. He ends up, I think, pretty much in the same place that Jesus or Paul or the writer to the Hebrews would, namely that sacrifice was necessary for a season. But it's we are here along with Jesus and Paul, we are here to announce the end of sacrifice and sacrificial practice. Unfortunately, sacrifice came right back in to Christianity right away through Jerusalem Christianity first. Eventually, we would call it Jewish Christianity. And then the appropriation of legal traditions in the late 2nd and early 3rd century in the early church, the reintroduction of law, and through that, then the use of metaphors related to atonement that begin to be more legal in their orientation, but are really not fleshed out. The legalities of atonement in the early church have to do with the transaction between God and the devil. That shifts with Anselm, turning it into a transaction between the Father and the Son. But Calvin's the one that comes along and cements that horrible, horrible God with atonement theory. I think Girard he changed his mind a lot. He matured. He really did. His thought really did mature. His later stuff is so good. The early stuff, he's a young man. It's revolutionary. It's full of passion and life. It's René wanting to make a reputation for himself. Whereas the later stuff, and he's reflecting back and thinking things through. He's much clearer and much more generous, I think.
I have a dissertation that I can't remember if I put it in the files, but I'll put it up. And it's by a guy named Barry, and the last name is Barry. And that's what he's doing. He's taking Girard and he's going back and looking at the Jewish, the two goats, and interpreting it in a Girardian fashion that I think is quite brilliant. But I'm always curious. I guess I'm never quite sure if Girard himself would have taken it as far, but maybe he would have.
I'll be curious to see if Barry references Dave Dawson's book.
We should all read it tomorrow because we're on the eve of Yom Kippur.
Is it?
My wife is Jewish, so I'm very, very aware of the fact. Yeah,
tomorrow's Yom Kippur.
She's let me know. She's let me know what hour she's going to be fasting, so that I don't make meals for her.
Okay. Well, first of all, that's really good to know. But I would be curious if the Barry book references Dave Dawson's Flesh Becomes Word.
And you're also you're going to put up the Hebrews stuff that you've written, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, on that fifth, I think it's the 5th session we're together.
Okay.
Exegeting some text.
Good deal.
Cool. Well, thank you.
So if you think about, by the way, an Orthodox Jewish friend of mine who lives in Israel, he just did a little tiny short video on the symbolism of the two goats in connection to Yom Kippur. I can, if you think it might be of interest to the class, I can send it around to the email.
That'd be great. That'd be great. I'll put it, if you send it to me, I'll put it in
the classroom. Yeah.
All right. Will do.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining me tonight. I hope it was beneficial. Next week we'll start getting in and gutting it out.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate you doing this, and we're looking forward to a great class.
Awesome. Okay, I'll see everybody next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Forging Plowshares is a community dedicated to cultivating the peaceful kingdom by providing in-depth, transformative biblical and theological education and discipleship. If you have found this podcast valuable, please remember to share on social media. If you have questions about what you've heard, or if you'd like to learn more about how you can get involved with Forging Plowshares or even support this ministry financially, please visit our website, forgingplowshares.org.